You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio. Welcome to the Bitter Medicine Podcast, where it's all about Black empowerment. Our show focuses on Black news and entertainment, arts, science, economics, history, people, and strategies that uplift, empower, and motivate Africans within the diaspora. And now, your host, whose favorite color is black, Goku.
Welcome back to the Bitter Medicine Podcast. I am your host, Koku, and tonight we're celebrating day 4 of Kwanzaa. Today's day in Kwanzaa is Nia, or purpose. And what we're going to read, and I'm going to try to make this a short show tonight. I've been doing 2.5, 3-hour shows the last couple times out, so I'm going to try and make this a quicker show. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to read from the African Union's 10-year implementation booklet tonight. And I'm going to start with the executive summary, but I'm going to read the chapter on the plan, right? Seeing how we're discussing purpose tonight, I want to talk about this Agenda 2063, the plan for Africa. First, as always, I want to remind you guys that there are other shows on KWAZ Radio Podcast Network. Make sure to check those out.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the Pro-Black Perspective, where Black problems are addressed with Black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
Yes, indeed. Make sure to tune into those shows as well as the Queen's Council on KWAZ Radio. So we're going to start with the executive summary of this booklet, and the idea that the African Union has is that there's in this 50-year span. So this idea came about in 2013, which I think was the golden jubilee for African independence. And the plan was for the next 50 years, which will land us in 2063 from 2013, of course. And the plan changes every 10 years. So it's 5 10-year plans, right? And like I said, I want to start with the executive summary and then head over into the plan, at least, I guess, for the first 10 years that ends in 2023. All right? So that's the stage that is set. And again, we're doing this because it's the night of Kwanzaa that talks about Nia, or purpose. And we should have a purpose going forward and a plan, within our purpose. And before I start, if you're here with me tonight, I thank you for being here. If you've been with me over the past few nights, I also thank you for being here as well. And I'm going to drop some links. KWAZ Radio has some links in the chat. I'm going to drop some links for this podcast specifically. Make sure to support. Head over to our social media and support, support all our shows elsewhere, in terms of social media. Something weird is going on here, but that's fine. Okay. So the executive summary of this plan says, over the past years, 1963 to 2013, Africa focused her collective on the decolonization, struggle against apartheid, and attainment of political independence for the continent. On the occasion of the Golden Jubilee, May 2013, of the Organization of African Unity, African Union, right? So it's a 50-year anniversary of the creation of the OAU. That's what it is. Which spearheaded the decolonization process. The continent rededicated itself to the attainment of the Pan-African vision of an integrated, prosperous, and peaceful Africa, driven by its own citizens, representing a dynamic force in the international arena. To achieve this vision, the Golden Jubilee Summit of the Union came up with a solemn declaration in 8 areas, spanning social and economic development, integration, democratic governance, and peace and security, amongst others, as the planks of the vision. In order to make the solemn declaration a reality, and within the context of the AU vision, the Golden Jubilee Summit of the Union directed the African Union Commission, supported by the new Partnership for Africa's Development, Planning and Coordinating Agency, the African Development Bank, and the UN Economic Commission for Africa to prepare a continental 50-year agenda through a people-driven process outlining the Africa we want, namely Agenda 2063. All right, so that's the 50-year plan. The 7 aspirations, right? Aspiration 1, a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development, an integrated continent, politically united, and based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of Africa's Renaissance. Aspiration 3, an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Aspiration number 4, a peaceful and secure Africa. Aspiration number 5, an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, shared values, and ethics. Aspiration number 6, an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women and youth, and caring for children. Aspiration number 7, Africa is a strong, united, resilient, and influential global player and partner. If you're here live with me today, or even if you're, listening to the playback on YouTube, tell me, are you resonating with those 7 aspirations? Is there some that you would take out? Is there some aspirations you'd add? Would you edit an aspiration here and there? Let me know in the comments. So that gives you the idea of the aspirations, right? What I want to go to now is the plan. Again, this is not intended to be a long show tonight, so I just want to get, right to the business. I will, however, if there's a live discussion going on in the chat room, by all means, I will have that discussion. Let me make sure that I'm being heard in the chat room. You guys can hear me in the chat room? If you can hear me, give me a thumbs up. Let me know that I'm being heard. Once you see me scrolling through the document, you know I'm probably talking, right? So again, I'm jumping over some parts. I'm going to chapter 2 of this document, and I'll start with the purpose of the plan. So the purpose of the plan is the purpose for developing a plan is to identify priority areas, set specific targets, define strategies and policy measurements required to implement the first 10 years of the journey. Bring to fruition the fast-track programs and initiatives outlined in the Malabo decisions of the AU to provide the big push and breakthroughs for Africa's economic and social transformation. Number 3 is to provide information to all key stakeholders at the national, regional, and continental levels. The diaspora, development partners, global financial institutions, the expected results, outcomes for the first 10-year implementation plan, and the roles expected of them. 4, assign responsibilities to all stakeholders in the implementation, monitoring, and evaluation. So when we talk about nation building, just as an aside, who are the stakeholders and what are their, what categories of stakeholders are there and what are their responsibilities, right? And lastly, outline the strategies required to ensure availability of resources and capacities together with citizens' engagement to implement the first year plan. That's an important one, right? Based on our discussion last episode, which was last night. You can't go, you really shouldn't go full steam ahead with a plan for people without consulting the people about the plan. You also have to plan how you're moving forward carefully, because you don't want to start out doing one thing, right? Which might be a little bit of a soft touch, and then when you realize people aren't responding, you then go to a much harsher thing, a much harsher way of proceeding, and now you have the people upset because it feels like force, right? All right, thanks. I see the pro-black perspective is here. They can hear me in the chat room. I appreciate the feedback. All right. So that last one, check on the availability of resources, capacities, together with the citizens' engagement to implement the first 10-year plan. So that brings us to this section called the foundations of the first 10-year plan. Foundations of the first 10-year plan, a subset of the 50-year horizon of Agenda 2063, as contained in the framework document, are the following. The AU Constitutive Act, which entails the African Union vision, the 8 priorities of the Solemn Declaration, the African aspirations for 2063 obtained through a consultative process, regional and continental frameworks, national plans and visions. The common African position on post 2015, and I don't even need to get to that. What I need to point out here, for those who are live especially, is the 8 priorities of the 50th anniversary Solemn Declaration. Right? The 8 priorities are African identity and renaissance, continue to struggle against colonialism and the right to self-determination, the integration agenda, agenda for social and economic development, peace and security agenda, democratic governance, determining Africa's destiny, and lastly, Africa's place in the world. Those are the 8 priorities of the 50th anniversary. So we're not at the 50th anniversary yet. We're still in the first 10-year plan. So I'm going to go now to the goals and priorities for the first 10 years. And again, the first 10 years ends in 2023, so we're almost there, right? The context. Africa's achievements over the last decade and a half are significant. Across the region, economic growth has firmly taken root, and there's more to that growth than just export of raw materials, with increased exports and foreign direct investment. You see that? Foreign direct investment. So the AU is still on this foreign investment to bring Africa up. You see the problems that we have? If current growth trajectory is maintained, incomes are projected to double in 22 years. Incomes are projected to double in 22 years. All right. Furthermore, political stability, peace and security, and reforms in governance have changed the political landscape. Women and youth are progressively having a greater voice in decision making. With aid declining, Africa is also increasingly financing its own development thanks to export earnings, trade, and remittance, amongst others. And that's a good thing to hear. Right? Give me 1 second here. However, these positive developments are juxtaposed with significant challenges and positive overview. And the positive overview also makes significant variations across regions and between countries. The current global outlook on growth underscores the headwinds that African economies have to contend with, especially the decline in commodity prices, amongst others. A detailed situational analysis has been undertaken and presented in Chapter 3 of the Agenda 2063 Framework document, namely Africa the last 50 years and the present, progress, challenges, and implications for Agenda 2063. Below is a summary of the key priority areas African governments, regional economic communities, and continental AU organs, and other stakeholders must address in the next 50 years if the vision of the Africa we want by 2063 is to be attained. Okay. Aspiration number 1, a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development, ending poverty, inequalities of income and opportunity, job creation, especially addressing youth employment, facing up the challenges of rapid population growth and urbanization, improvement of habitats, and access to basic necessities of life. You see, this basic necessities of life keeps coming up. You know, in 2020, when this document came out in 2013, we still haven't conquered that problem. The basic necessities of life are water, sanitation, electricity, providing social security and protection, developing Africa's human and social capital through an education and skills revision, emphasizing science and technology. Go back and listen to an episode I did some time ago about we need more STEM in Black society, more science, technology, engineering, mathematics, education, Black society, and expanding access to quality health care services, particularly for women and girls, transforming Africa's economies through beneficiation from Africa's natural resources, manufacturing, industrialization, and value addition, as well as raising productivity and competitiveness, radically transforming African agriculture to enable the continent to feed itself and be a major player as a net food exporter, exploiting the vast potential of Africa's blue ocean economy. Finally, putting in place measures to sustainably manage the continent's rich biodiversity, forests, land, and waters, and using mainly adaptive measures to address climate change risks. And I gotta tell you, I mentioned this the other night, and I'll say it again, man. If you are raising children or planning to have children in the near future, as they go through the education process, right? One of the things you got to think about, and this is why you have to know this stuff, because this is not something a kid will just know, right? As parents and guardians, we have to be knowledgeable so that the children can be pointed to the right knowledge. One of the things you need to be pointing your kids at, putting their focus on, attention to, is these areas, right, of that needs development in Africa, and getting them to from a young age start to learn the basics of these areas, and as they proceed in age, they should grow in knowledge in these areas. When you talk about the idea of going back to Africa, right? If you follow these areas that need development in Africa, you can be a problem solver in these areas. And there's a lot of areas here. When I was in college, there was a boom at one point, this in the 90s. There was a boom of students coming from Trinidad and Tobago and majoring in geology. And I was like, geology? What are you doing with geology? And a good friend of mine from Trinidad said, hey, they're going to get that geology degree and go back and make good money in the oil industry in Trinidad. Natural oil and natural gas. And I always took note of that point. Several years later, they found oil in my hometown, and I told you guys what the deal is, that somebody, some foreign company, I don't know, it was BP or Shell or something, was giving my country 12 cents on the dollar for the oil found there. They say, well, yeah, we'll pull it up, but we'll take 88 cents of the dollar, of each dollar that this oil makes. Trinidad was doing the right thing. Go send your people out to get their education, and the hope is that eventually get enough people with this education, they could come back and we could own and run our own oil fields. Take note of these areas, people, and tell your kids, that direct your kids and grandkids or what have you into one of those industries. Aspiration number 2, an integrated continent, politically united, based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of Africa's Renaissance. So they want to accelerating progress towards continental unity. We talked about unity just the other day, right? Again, I like to see the steps towards this. And by the way, I'm going to go back to that unity question in the near future with some points from my own research about uniting people. And we're going to have that open discussion, but next time will be around some bullet points that I put together. Unity and integration for sustained growth, trade, exchanges of goods, services, free movement of people and capital through 1, establishing a united Africa, 2, fast tracking of the CFTA. I used to remember what that was, collective, some such, hold on. Sometimes you don't remember everything. Continental Free Trade Area, right? CFTA. Continental Free Trade Area. 3, improving connectivity through newer and bolder initiatives to link the continent by rail, road, sea, and air. By rail, by road, by sea, and by air. And 4, developing regional and continental power pools as well as ICT. And they do offer by the way, this document is free. You can go and download it. They do offer a glossary at the beginning of the booklet. Aspiration number 3, an Africa of good governance, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Consolidating democratic gains and improving the quality of governance, respect for human rights and the rule of law, building strong institutions for a development state, and facilitating the emergence of development-oriented and visionary leadership in all spheres at all levels. Aspiration number 4, a peaceful and secure Africa, strengthening governance, accountability, and transparency as a foundation for a peaceful Africa, strengthening mechanisms for securing peace and reconciliation at all levels, as well as addressing emerging threats to Africa's peace and security, and putting in small practices for the continent to finance her security needs. Aspiration number 5, an Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics, inculcating the spirit of Pan-Africanism, tapping Africa's rich heritage and culture to ensure that the creative parts are major contributors to Africa's growth and transformation, and restoring and preserving Africa's cultural heritage, including its languages. I have a question for you guys, particularly in the chat. How should we take it? Because when Africans talk about Pan-Africanism, right, it turns out that they're mostly talking about Pan-Africanism within the continent of Africa. Whereas we outside of it talk about it in terms of the diaspora. Now, I know that they mentioned the diaspora earlier, but if you listen to a lot of Pan-African talk out of the continent, it really isn't inclusive of all Africans globally. Right? How do you feel about that? And how do we change that? Because I think that plays a role in why we have those who will burn down the idea of Pan-Africanism over here in the West. Tapping Africa's rich heritage and culture to ensure that the creative arts are major contributors to Africa's growth and transformation, and restoring and preserving Africa's cultural heritage, including its languages. Aspiration 6, an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential of African people, especially its women and youth, and caring for children, strengthening the role of Africa's women through ensuring gender equality and parity in all spheres of life, political, economic, and social, eliminating all forms of discrimination and violence against women and girls, creating opportunities for Africa's youth for self-realization, access to health, education, and jobs, and ensuring safety and security for Africa's children and providing for early childhood development. Aspiration number 7. Africa is a strong, united, resilient, and influential global player and partner, improving Africa's place in the global governance system, UNSC, financial institutions, global commons such as outer space, improving Africa's partnerships and refusing them more strategically to respond to African priorities for growth and transformation, and ensuring that the continent has the right strategies to finance its own development and reducing aid dependency. The priorities that emerge from the analysis are also in line with those identified from an extensive review of national plans and regional continental frameworks, and serve to inform the Agenda 2063 goals, priority areas, and targets. And, just to go back to that Pan-African point, the way people can view it, those who have a bug up their ass about Pan-Africanism, right? And this is why, we got to put some heat on the Pan-Africanists as well, who haven't done a good job of connecting these ideas and importantly connecting the people, right? It could be argued that Pan-Africanism from an African viewpoint is about connecting the countries within the continent, and that they don't really need Africans from the Caribbean or Africans from America or the UK or South America. Whereas, because the rest of us are not on the continent, Pan-Africanism for us means, and it's essential for us, for it to mean that it has to be about the continent. So we have to look to the continent for that power paradigm, right? Provided that Africa is built into a powerful nation. But the African on the continent could be looking at Pan-Africanism from the standpoint of, well, we don't really need these Africans outside of the continent. Because the power is here in the continent. So what I'm getting at is this is where we need peace to Baku Umobo. Peace, brother, from Twitter. So this is where we need people doing the work to connect the people better. And to really make people understand that the struggle is for all of us. Not just those in the continent, excluding others, but the struggle is really for all of us. So this brings us to selection of goals and priority areas. Agenda 2063 has a 50-year horizon with 5 10-year plan frameworks. The first 10-year plan into the period will align with the expected outcomes at the end of 2063. The key underpinnings for the selection of the goals, priority areas, and targets for this 10-year plan, which should be seen as a subset of the 50-year plan framework, are areas where the African citizenry expects to see immediate impact within the context of the African aspirations. These areas constitute the flagship programs of first 10-year plan, the short, medium-term development priorities of member states, and the RECs, the RECs, and the RECs, ongoing continental frameworks that fall within the next 10 years, and targets within the Agenda 2063 framework document, which fall within the next 10 years. So these fast-track projects and initiatives, what are they? This is an innovative approach designed to provide the big push and propel growth and transformation through fast-tracking the implementation of programs identified by the AU Assembly as having immediate positive impact on perceptions of the African citizenry with respect to the success of the Agenda 2063. The Malabo AU Summit of 2014 mandated the AU Commission to explore and prepare concrete actions for the implementation of priority programs and projects identified in Agenda 2063. So let me quickly see if I can find that. If I can't quickly find it, we'll just move on. And you guys in the chat room are aware of what it is. By all means, you can post it. So I'm looking at it. Yeah, I'm not going to be able to find more detailed information quickly, so I'm just going to move on. Identified in Agenda 2063, notably the integrated high-speed train network, hastening the process for the creation of a continental free trade area. All right, that's CFTA. The African passport and free movement people. Okay, so this gives us a kind of a summary. I was trying to find something more official. This gives us a summary. So the integrated high-speed train network, hastening the process for the creation of a continental free trade area, the African passport and free movement of people, capitalization of opportunities in the aviation sector within the framework of the implementation of the Yamoussoukro decision on the unification of African airspace. Okay. Implementation of the Grand Inga Dam project, the Pan-African E-Network, that sounds interesting. The creation of an annual consultative platform for policy dialogue involving a wide range of stakeholders and any other integrative initiatives that are in line with the spirit of Agenda 2063. These programs or projects have been incorporated into the first 10-year plan. Further details of these flagship projects are contained in Annex 4, Text Box 2.2, provides highlights of the flagship programs. So maybe that's coming up. So that brings us to section near-term, national, and REX development focus. In the chat room, or on the playback, how many of you guys are familiar with this 10-year plan? How many of you have read this 10-year plan before? A part of this 50-year plan. Near-term, national, and REX development focus. The preparatory process of Agenda 2063 entailed extensive consultations with the African citizenry, including the diaspora, African civil society organizations, and the regional economic communities. That's the REX, amongst others. All these groups indicated the need to make the development initiative of member states and the REX as part of the foundations of the first 10-year plan. Building on these member states and REX initiatives will not only serve as an incentive for full national and regional commitment, but also ensure that both the process and the outcomes of Agenda 2063 are owned by the people who provided the inputs into the preparation of their national and REX plans. Right? Very important. In view of the above review of member states and REX plans was done, lessons learned from the reviews indicated that the focus of first 10-year plan of Agenda 2063 should include the following areas: sustainable and inclusive economic growth, human capital development, very important, we talk about that a lot in this show, agriculture, value addition, agribusiness, industrialization, manufacturing and value additions to national resources, employment generation, social projection, gender, women's development and youth empowerment, good governance, including capable institutions, infrastructural development, science, technology, and innovation, peace and security, and culture, arts, and sports. So that brings us to text box 2.1, highlights of fast-track projects or initiatives. Integrated high-speed train network connecting all African capitals and commercial centers through an African high-speed train to facilitate movement of goods, factors, services, and people, reduce transport costs, and relieve congestion of current and future systems. I once saw a map showing, mapping the railroads in all of the continent, and a lot of the continent is not being accessed by rail. A lot of it is not being accessed by rail. Very inefficient in its design, and it's a very important thing for them to really work with. It's always shocking that you're borrowing this money from these peoples, and you wouldn't put it into a proper rail system to unite these capitals of African countries. But then again, the lenders have their rules for how you even could use the money. Maybe that's not in the rules. An African virtual university, increasing access to tertiary and continuing education in Africa by reaching large numbers of students and professionals in multiple sites simultaneously, and developing relevant and high quality open, distance, and e-learning resources to offer prospective students a guaranteed access to the university from anywhere in the world and anytime, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. That reminds me, the brother Athrazer on Twitter sent me a message. He sent me a few messages, but one of the messages was, and now of course it won't open, but one of the messages was of an African sister. Did you guys see this? There's an African sister, I want to say she's only about 26 years old, right? Who owns an accredited college, right? An African sister who owns an accredited college. I want to say, I believe, she's 28 years old, right? Let me see if I can pull this up on the screen quickly. You guys could look this article up and you can look it up and be inspired, right? If there's a way I could get her on the show, trust me, I will. Because it's very inspiring what she did. This thing is taking too long, so we'll move on from that idea. But the sister's name, let me see if I can get her name. It's Caroline Essenam Adzogli. Caroline Essenam Adzogli. Try to look her up. Just look up 28-year-old African woman who owns an accredited college, and you should be able to find it. All right? But that's the kind of work we need to be doing. Right? And this is a great idea that you could learn, provided that it's African centered, of course, right? But that you could learn or receive an African centered education anywhere in the world at any time, right? Something built by Africans, right? The next one is a single African aviation market. Open skies concept whereby all African airlines can fly to any member country, which is wild that that's not a thing already. Establishment of the Continental Monetary and Financial Institutions, the African Investment Bank, the African Remittance Institute, the African Credit Guarantee Facility, the African Monetary Union, and the African Central Bank. African Commodity Strategy, enabling African countries add value, extract higher rents from their commodities, integrate into the global value chains, and promote a vertical and horizontal diversification anchored in value addition and local continent development. Creation of an annual African consultative platform designed to bring together once a year the African political leadership, private sector, academia, and civil society to discuss developments and constraints, as well as measures to be taken to realize the aspiration and goals of the Agenda 2063. Establishment of the Continental Free Trade Area by 2017. Again, this was written in 2013, to significantly accelerate growth of intra-Africa trade and use trade more effectively as an engine of growth and sustainable development. Through doubling of intra-Africa trade by 2022, strengthen Africa's common voice and policy space in global trade negotiations. Had to take a little sip of water. The African passport and free movement of people. Transporting Africa's laws, which remain generally restrictive on movement of people despite political commitments to bring down borders with the view to promoting the issuance of visas by member states, enhance free movement of all African citizens in all African countries. Implementation of the Grand Inca Dam project. The optimal development of the Inga Dam will generate 43,200 megawatts of power to support current regional power pools and their combined service to transform Africa from traditional to modern sources of energy and ensure access of all Africans to clean and affordable electricity. Africa should really be leading the world in solar, honestly. The Pan-African E-Network. This involves a wide range of stakeholders and envisages putting in place policies and strategies that will lead to transformative e-applications and services in Africa, especially the intra-African broadband, terrestrial infrastructure, and cybersecurity, making the information revolution the basis for service delivery in the bio and nanotechnology industries, and ultimately transform Africa into an e-society. Right there is, more suggestions for what our youth need to be getting into. I was telling my sons about something like this the other day. Make yourself marketable, right? To and for your people. Silencing the guns by 2020. Ending all wars, civil conflicts, gender-based violence, and violent conflicts, and prevent genocide. Monitor progress through the establishment and operationalization of an African Human Security Index. Africa Outer Space Strategy aims to strengthen that's a part of the same point. Africa Outer Space Strategy aims to strengthen Africa's use of outer space to bolster its development. Outer space is of critical importance to the development of Africa in all fields: agriculture, disaster management, remote sensing, climate forecast, banking and finance, as well as defense and security. Again, areas to start to diversify ourselves. And I see it all the time. As you guys know, I teach a science course. I teach a microbiology course, and most of the black students, to be honest, most of them are not necessarily doing doing gangbusters in those classes, but most of them aspire to be like a medical doctor. Sometimes I have to tell some of them, hey, like there's other things you can do. You could pursue science. And if the title doctor is so important to you, you can still get that by way of a PhD. If that's what you want to do. Of course, we know what the challenges and the problems that tend to come from that kind of thing is. If they're not grounded in themselves and their African tradition, they will be lost to the quote-unquote dominant society. But there's other areas that our kids can get into. And we got to pay attention to these kinds of things. We have the power to make our kids, our grandkids, our little siblings, whatever it is. You know, kids we're around for some reason. You know, we have the power and the knowledge to kind of nudge them into certain areas. But we also got to ground them into who you're going into those areas for. Africa's access to space technology products is no longer a matter of luxury, and there is a need to speed up access to these technologies and products. New developments in satellite technologies make these very accessible to African countries. The Brazzaville meeting on aerial space technologies underlies the need for appropriate policies and strategies in order to develop a reasonable market for space products in Africa. They got satellites now that are like the size of a soccer ball. You know? And the power of being able to reach your own satellite and to have ownership of your own satellite is huge. When you got to piggyback off other people's technology, you are in the loser's position. This brings us to a section called Continental Frameworks. The AUC has developed frameworks to guide the continent towards a common focus in the developmental, political, evolutionary process of member states, regions, and the continent. These frameworks, which cover the areas of agricultural production and productivity, economic integration, industrialization, including mining, infrastructure, health and education, science and technology, good governance or democracy, and culture, amongst others, have been integrated into the first 10-year plan to ensure that they are not seen as parallel initiatives to Agenda 2063. In view of this, there was a review of the continental initiatives, the goals, targets, timelines, and processes of these initiatives cascading from the continental to the RECs and ultimately to the member states have been captured by the plan. The process for implementing the continental framework requires that targets are set not only at the national level, but also at the RECs and continental levels. Agenda 2063 Results Framework. All targets that fall between 2013 and 2025 in the Agenda 2063 Results Framework are automatic candidates for inclusion in the first 10-year plan. In this regard, the associated goals and priority areas have been included in the Results Framework for the first 10-year plan. The focus areas under this category in general fall under 1. AU Assembly decisions, directives, timelines for ending hunger, malnutrition, silencing of guns, amongst others, and 2. AU Plan of Action or treaties, timelines on the minimum integration programs. So this brings us to the section Goals and Priority Areas for the first 10 years. The goals and related priority areas of the first 10 years of Agenda 2063 are presented in Table 2.1. In all, there are 20 goals and 38 priority areas. They are derived from the overall Agenda 2063 results framework subject to the selection process discussed in the preceding section. They are presented around 7 aspirations. Under each aspiration are the goals for those aspirations. Under each goal are the priority areas presented in column 3 of the table. The targets of the goals, priority areas, part of the results matrix is provided in the plan framework in chapter 3. So you see in table 2 here, you have the first aspiration, a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development. The goal is a high standard of living. The goal for this aspiration is a high standard of living, quality of life and well-being for all citizens. The priority areas are incomes, jobs and decent work, poverty, inequality and hunger, social security and protection, including persons with disabilities, modern and livable habits and basic quality services. Second goal for this aspiration, well-educated citizens and skills revolution underpinned by science, technology, and innovation. Priority areas, education and STI skills, right? Skills, technology, and innovation skills, driven revolution. A third goal for this aspiration is healthy and well-nourished citizens. Priority is health and nutrition. Fourth goal is transformed economies. Priorities are sustainable and inclusive economic growth, SCI-driven manufacturing, industrialization, and value addition. This is all a part of the education. Economic diversification, resilience, tourism, and hospitality. A fifth goal is modern agriculture for increased productivity and production. Its focus areas are agricultural productivity and production. Our sixth goal is blue ocean economy for accelerated economic growth, and that the focuses there are the marine resources and energy, ports operations, and marine transport. Seventh goal is environmentally stable climate and resilient economies and communities. Focuses there are biodiversity conservation, sustainable natural resources management, in terms of water security, climate resilience, and natural disasters preparedness and prevention, and renewable energy. The second aspiration is an integrated continent, politically united, and based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision of Africans' Renaissance. Our goal there is United Africa, federal or confederate. Focus areas, framework, and institutions for United Africa. Other goals are continental financial and monetary institutions are established and functional. Priority areas are financial and monetary institutions. Then there's world-class infrastructure, crisscrosses Africa, communications and infrastructure connectivity are the priority areas there. The third aspiration is an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. One of the goals there is the democratic values, practices, universal principles of human rights. Remember, we read a paper about, Africans look at human rights a little bit differently, right? Justice and the rule of law entrenched. So I wonder if they're gonna, because they mentioned universal principles, I wonder if they're gonna focus on what, these Eurasians consider human rights versus what Africans have always considered to be human rights. Priority points are democracy and good governance, human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Another goal for this aspiration is capable institutions and transformative leadership in place. Priorities are institutions and leadership, participatory development, and local governance. As I'm looking at this, it will be a good idea in respects to nation building, which a lot of this can be attached to, right? And in fact, most of this can. But it'll be good to create such grids of our own as well. It's a good practice, I think, for us to within like organizations and communities to build these grids for our communities and build them for the ultimate idea of nation building. And if you see anything that's missing that you think is underdeveloped in terms of its thought, make sure to post that in the comment section. So the fourth aspiration is a peaceful and secure Africa. One of the goals is peace, security, and stability is preserved. Priority there is maintenance and preservation of peace and security. One is stable and peaceful Africa. Priority being institutional structure for African Union instruments on peace and security. Another goal is full functional and operational APSA. I'm not sure what APSA is. The function is fully operational functional APSA pillars. You guys can look up what APSA is at your own convenience. The fifth aspiration, Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. A goal there is African cultural renaissance is preeminent. Is an African cultural renaissance preeminent? Focus areas there are priority areas of values and ideals of Pan-Africanism, cultural values and African Renaissance, cultural heritage, creative arts, and business. Again, if you have, let me tell you something. I'm hopping on this point because you know what our project is, right? Curriculum building. And I'm telling you, man, if you have kids around you and they don't know what it is they want to do in life, and I mean, this is ripe with ideas. If you are contemplating to repatriate to the continent, and you feel like you don't have, something to offer, you right now could go and do some programs, right? They might not be African centered per se, but you should be African minded at this point if you're an adult, right? Go and get your certificate in something, right? Get your certificate, get you, a couple of months or a year or so of experience and get out of here. Aspiration 6, an Africa whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential offered by African people, especially its women and youth, and caring for children. The goal there is full gender equality in all spheres of life. Priorities being women and girls empowerment, violence and discrimination against women and girls. And we talked about, we read through a paper that was about, the role of women in nation building, and how it took a while, but a lot of nations eventually started to catch up. I'm not sure if they're all there, all in the right place right now, but a lot of nations did start to catch up in terms of incorporating its women and girls in parts of building up the nation. One of the other goals of this aspiration is engaged and empowered youth and children, priority youth empowerment and children. And then there's a seventh aspiration, an Africa as a strong, united, and resilient global player and partner. Africa is a major partner in global, the goal is Africa is a major partner in global affairs and peaceful coexistence. Priority areas are Africa's place in global affairs, partnership. Another goal is Africa takes full responsibility for financing her development, which is key. No more gifts and loans and all that stuff we talked about last night, right? So they're talking about an African capital market. It's a priority area. Fiscal system and public sector revenues is priority. Development assistance. What is development assistance? Right. Text box 2.3 explains or outlines the issues related to the goals, targets, and indicative strategies of the results matrix for the first 10 years. It explains or defines some of the concepts and targets in relationship to the corresponding nomenclature in the SDGs. It raises the issue of baseline information, sources of the targets for the first 10-year plan, and the nature of such targets. So in text box 2.2, we have definitions, baseline information, sources, and nature of targets. The definitions are: the definition of goal is different from that of the SDGs. Since Agenda 2063 is of a 50-year horizon, the goals are broader. Priority areas and the associated targets define the goals. While the goals are fixed, the priority areas and their associated targets can cycles. Case of the MDGs with their 15-year horizon, the goals are very specific and are like a target under this 10-year plan results, and are like a target under this 10-year plan results framework. The definition or computational methodology for various targets are consistent with the definitions specified by the relevant agencies as the World Bank, UNESCO, WHO, UNIDO, ILO, FAO, amongst others. Baseline information. Agenda 2063 will be implemented mainly at the national level. The targets that have been set have built-in flexibilities to address the diversities of member states in the development trajectory. National level baseline information built on existing national systems will be used to track the progress of implementation by member states at the national level. The existence of continental level average baseline information is not an implementation of the Agenda 2063. Point 2, sources of the targets for 2023, the first 10-year plan. Within the 2063 targets, the targets for the first 10 years have been derived from 4 main sources. Continental frameworks. These frameworks have set targets varying from 2018 to 2025. For example, the targets on agriculture were obtained from CAADP, 10-year targets. Those for water and sanitation were obtained from the Africa Water Vision. All right, the targets for science, technology, and innovation were obtained from the emerging targets on the science, technology, etc. So they're just telling you where they're getting their baselines from. The nature of targets. 1, they are as far as possible SMART, SMART selected. In addition, national capacities for the use or tracking of the targets are taken into account. 2, they allow for diversities in the positions of member states in the development trajectory. The phrase "at least X times the 2013 level" should be seen in this vein. All right. Close to the end here. So Africa in 2023. Before I read this section, let me take a quick station ID break.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
This is DAX. You tune into the Harsh Reality Podcast, providing you with social commentary on the news affecting our community, only on KWAZ Radio.
Peace, family. This is Oni, inviting you to listen to the pro-black perspective, where black problems are addressed with black solutions.
You are listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast on KWAZ Radio.
And we're back. I don't know why Firefox is up there, but yeah. So we're at this part of the paper called Africa in 2023. Oh, yeah, I know why Firefox is up there. I had opened it, it was taking too long. Because I wanted to show you this is a sister here, right? As you can see from the title, meet the youngest woman in Africa to own an accredited college. You can see at 28 years old, most individuals are adjusting to life after college or enrolling again to advance their degrees even further, but not Carol Essenam Adzogbo, right? So you can look up that sister and read more of her story. But here's what she looks like. Here's the title, and this was an article on Afrotech, on afrotech.com. So you can check that out. So back to the paper. We're at this section called Africa in 2023, which is just around the corner. Africa's main challenge for the next 50 years is the realization of the African vision of building an integrated Africa driven by its own citizens, representing a dynamic force in the international arena. This first 10-year plan within Agenda 2063 lays the foundation for the trajectories of the 7 aspirations whose will converge towards the realization of the African Union vision by 2063. Within the context of Agenda 2063, the African citizenry expects that by 2023, Aspiration 1, a prosperous Africa based on inclusive growth and sustainable development, every African would see an improvement in his or her standard of living. It will be manifested by increased incomes by at least 30%. Remember, they wrote this in 2013, so this was meant to represent what is going to be done by 10 years later, which is 2023. So over 10 years, they expected to see increases in real incomes by at least 30%. This will be fueled by substantial inclusive economic growth and transformation opportunities to at least 1 in 4 persons looking for work, coupled with state income support to the vulnerable, the marginalized, and the disabled in the society. Livable wages will decline by at least 25%. Hunger and malnutrition would have been reduced by 80%, and hunger at least 30%, with an accent on women. So that's something that in 2023 we should be looking at. We should be looking to see how well these aspirations match up with the realizations, right? With the real deal of what's going on. And so that's a good thing about this reading too, is that not only that it gives you an idea, you know, what areas to jump into or to advise young Africans coming up, but it also makes us, you know, hold these so-called thought leaders accountable. Are you guys doing the work that meets these numbers, or at least approaches these numbers, right? And that's something that we would need to look into to make sure that, you know, something is actually being done, or otherwise it's just more rhetoric. Education as a main vehicle for intergenerational social mobility would have been expanded and improved by 2023. Children having early, childhood education would have increased. Secondary school would be compulsory, with an accent on science, technology, and innovation. 7 out of 10 secondary students who don't go on to tertiary education would have the opportunity to do technical vocational training programs, right? You should see more tertiary level education in terms of universities and stuff to provide expanded access to large number of students. beyond what the traditional system could admit. So they want to be able to admit to have more college educated students. But again, the tricky thing there is that education needs to be designed completely by Africa, right? By 2023, all forms of malnutrition, maternal, child, and neonatal mortalities would have been reduced by at least 50%, against the background of an expanded access to quality healthcare and services. A lot of you students in CUNY, in the City University New York system of colleges, who are these health and nutrition majors, man, right here would be your opportunity, with the proper preparation, of course. Access to antiretroviral or persons afflicted by HIV will be universal, and proportion of deaths attributable to HIV and malaria would have been reduced by 50%. Basic necessities of life, safe drinking water and sanitation will be available to 9 out of 10 persons. And electricity access and internet connectivity increased by at least 50%. Improved sanitation will be underpinned by recycling of at least 50% of the waste generated in the cities, who by 2023, as the latest, will be ready for the takeoff on mass rail transit systems. Beginnings of transformed African economies, which provide the resources and the medium for limiting poverty and hunger, material, child and neonatal mortality, universal primary and secondary education, will be visible, listen to that, right? Will be visible by 2023. GDP should go up by 7%. At least a third of its outputs generated by firms owned by citizens and member states. Labor-intensive manufacturing, industrialization underpinned by value addition to commodities, doubling of total agricultural factor productivity, and increased value to the blue economy, rising on fisheries, eco-friendly coastal tourism, marine, biotechnology, etc. Regional industrial hubs linked to the global value chains and commodity exchanges, and the African Minerals Development Center will be in place by 2023. Because I was just going to say, how come these plans never talk about, they always talk about agriculture, they never talk about the resources. Like, the plan is never to take back the resources. And as I've said before, be ready to fight for it. The inception gains from the economic transformation will go hand in hand with improved environmental conditions. At least 70% of terrestrial and inland water and 10% of coastal and marine areas would have been preserved. Right? The farmers, fisher folks, pastoralists will be practicing climate resilient production systems, keeping climate change in mind. Aspiration number 2, an integrated continent, politically united and based on the ideals of Pan-Africanism and the vision for Africa's Renaissance. Key first steps towards a continental government would have been taken by 2023. The legal framework for a continental government will be approved by 2023. I wonder where they are with that. Assembly of the Union, visa at the point of entry will be the norm and will facilitate the free movement of people, goods, and services. And, people might not understand how important that is, how important it is to be, for the continent to be able to get skilled, intellectual and skilled laborers from, neighboring and other countries of the continent. The idea being there that if you can, let's say you don't have the right people, but you can get people from, Uganda, Kenya, whatever, right? Ghana, right? Instead of those people in Kenya and Ghana who have the expertise, leaving Kenya and Ghana and Uganda and stuff like that, you could bring those Africans to your African nation to help them do the work. So you will limit the amount of brain drain that occurs. That's very key. I think a lot of people don't pay attention to that. When you open the borders in that way, allow people these intra-African visas, you stop these guys from then going to France and the U.S. and all kind of stuff and taking that intelligence out of the country. The foundations of a world-class infrastructure, transport, energy, water, e-connectivity will be noticeable in the continental economic system. The African integrated high-speed train network will be taking its first set of passengers between some connected cities, especially the youth imbued with the spirit of adventure, mobility, and Pan-Africanism. That sounds good. How much work? Do you guys know, does any of you know how far this integrated high-speed train system is in Africa? The African skies will be open to all African airlines, right? Every adult or youth will have access to a mobile phone. Regional power pools boost by at least 50%, increase in electricity generation will be in existence and will be contributing to the industrial manufacturing growth and comfort of the African citizenry. Now, I know these are aspirations. I know this is part of a plan. But the thing about a plan is, right, a plan has to come together. You got to work and start to show me where some of these items, right? Maybe not the bigger ticket items, but some of these items should be getting checked off. Aspiration 3, an Africa of good governance, democracy, respect for human rights, justice, and the rule of law. Democratic values and culture as enshrined in African governance architecture would have become entrenched in all Africa by 2023. Free, fair, and credible elections will be the norm, and at least 7 out of 10 persons will perceive democratic processes and institutions as being accountable and relevant. Well, I know that's probably nowhere close right now. Respect for the rule of law and due process, the rights of citizens will be part of the socio-political culture, and the institutions that nurture them will be found to be capable by at least 70% of the citizenry. The African peer review mechanism would have been adhered to by all members of the Union, and its impact would be reflected by the perceptions of the citizenry in the various continental governance metrics. Aspiration 4, peaceful and secure Africa. By 2023, all inter and intranational conflicts would have increased, and the target of silencing of all guns on the continent would have been attained. Okay. Sure. Okay. Aspiration 5, Africa with a strong cultural identity, common heritage, values, and ethics. The enjoyment or participation in national cultures and the creative arts will be a pastime for at least 20% of the population. Beginnings of the use of national languages in administrative systems and structures will emerge. Local content in all print and electronic media will have increased by at least 60%. The outcomes of intergenerational dialogue on culture will be used to define the continent's cultural trajectory beyond 2023. At least 30% of the cultural patrimonies and treasures would have been repatriated and cataloged for future use in the Envisage African Museum 2035. Didn't I see somewhere recently return a bunch of African loot? Was that a reality, or was that a demand by some African nation? Focal points of managing diaspora relations will be in place in all states, and will be managing the dual citizenship programs for the diaspora, amongst others. The cultural content of school curricula is increased by at least 60%. I mean, that's wild to me. That's wild to me. You telling me right now the cultural content of school curricula in Africa across the board is less than 60%? Oh, I'm sorry. Will increase by 60% of the 2013 level. But still, I mean, you have that much room? The first edition of the Encyclopedia Africana, that'll be cool, will be launched by the Assembly of the Union by 2023. That'll be cool. And they want to have a diaspora skills database, diaspora volunteer force, and diaspora marketplace. And this is what I'm talking about. Will not only be functional, but will also be contributing to the growth of the continent. Now we're talking. It took us a long time to really talk about diasporans. But if we're here talking about, you gotta get it, you have to get an education that can solve African problems, right? Then the continent itself must set up a pipeline to take agents of change from the diaspora and to bring them into the continent, right? That skills database, that's real cool. A volunteer force is cool as well. I mean, that's cool. Aspiration 6, Africa, whose development is people-driven, relying on the potential offered by African people, especially its youth and women, and caring for children. All over the continent, obstacles related to women owning or inheriting property or business, signing a contract, owning or managing a bank account will be history. I mean, my God. Now, is a lot of this, what I just said, is a lot of that tied to Islam in Africa? I think it is. At least 1 in 5 of all rural women will have access to and control productive assets, and gender parity and control. Representation, advancement will be the norm in all AU organs. Reduction in all forms of violence against women by 1/5 of the 2013 levels. Okay. All harmful social norms and customary practice will be things of the past. You're gonna have to get rid of that religion stuff and, that foreign religion stuff in the continent to get rid of a lot of that stuff. I don't know how. I'm not sure how well that could play out. In 2023, the African youth will not only be mobile across the continent, 50% of all new business startups will emanate from the ingenuity and talent acquired in part from the fruits of the skills revolution driven by science, technology, and innovation. All right. Again, STEM. Right. Since the guns would have been silenced and primary and secondary education would be compulsory, child labor exploitation, marriages, trafficking, and soldiering would not be seen or experienced by children born after 2023. Aspiration number 7, Africa is a strong, united, resilient, influential global partner and player. Africa, speaking with one voice in global affairs, announces the setting up of an Africa Space Agency, and the setting up of national systems or infrastructure for research and development that will contribute to the stock of global intellectual capital. See, that's the thing. You know, we talked about, and I'm trying to find, maybe you guys could help with that. I'm trying to find what is the African version of the scientific method, or have they just completely, you know, ran with the European steps of the scientific method? But I like to find the traditional or the early African steps of scientific inquiry, right? And talk about it on the show, compare and contrast. But yeah, definitely, again, I tell these students, you're studying science, you're talking about med school, you're not getting the grades for med school, for entrance into med school, but you can pivot to science. And instead of pivoting to science and doing what a lot of black students do when they get a science degree, and not say, you know, let's say a student only goes as far as a master's degree, right? They end up being teachers, and that's fine. I'm not knocking it. You know, because I teach as well. You know, I teach on a college level, but you know, especially for the youth, for you to go and conquer. And we know what that world is for us. Africans' increased financial self-reliance and sophistication will be earning respect in the global financial system. I don't know if respect is the problem, right? National capital markets will contribute to at least 10% of the development financing, in addition to other financing avenues in national fiscal systems, and the end of all illicit capital flows will ensure the proportion of aid in the national budget is no more than 25 to 2013 levels, right? So, you know, basically, that's what I wanted to bring out tonight. I wanted to talk about the plans. I want to talk about the aspirations and the priorities for each aspiration, right? And the idea, again, is to tie it back to the concept of purpose. We have to be a purpose-filled people. That's the only way forward. But we can't just talk purpose and not talk measurement of success. That's the next step. And another thing we can't do too, and you've heard me talk about this recently and many times in the past. When you make your plans and you have your goals, honestly, you should really be making 5-year plans. And I feel that way even in nation building or nation shaping, which is what this plan essentially is. Because the idea is to put 10 years into something and it failed. That's a lot of time to have wasted. Like the Silicon Valley boys say, you know, if you're gonna fail fast. But it's a thing with African people, no matter where you go, African people will linger on an idea really for 10, 15 years. And they'll only abandon it when the spirits make them abandon it, if you get what I'm saying, right? But there's a lesson to be learned in this. Have your aspirations, list them out. Have your aspirations, list them out, and you know, have your goals within each aspiration. Have your priority areas for each goal, and that's a plan. The next thing is to not waste time, taking a long time to achieve these plans, right? And actually try to get them done in a closer time to now than further from now. And this is how we need to move as individuals with, with the three things that I talked about recently: our health, our wealth, and our relationships, right? If we're gonna talk about unity, we need to be doing something now to unify. If we're talking about education, we need to do something now to educate. Imagine working on a curriculum for 10 years. Do you know how many African children are lost in that 10-year time? We got to do this stuff now. We got to give ourselves our aspirations, find our goals within each aspiration and our priority areas, and get to work. Okay, so today is the day of purpose, Nia, and KWAZ. I wanted to share with you what the African Union, formerly the OAU, is doing or should be doing right now, right, in terms of its goals and priorities for this first 10 years of a 50-year plan. Okay, this document, like I said, you can Google this document, you could find it. It's called the First 10-Year Implementation Plan from 2014 to 2023. It's a part of the Agenda 2063 overall plan, the Africa We Want, which is the name of the podcast tonight, the episode tonight, the Africa We Want. But there's also an example here in this reading for the Africans we want as well. You guys are Africans, we're Africans, we got to start making our own plans and implementing them, making them happen, right? If you have any comments about, if you have any comments about this plan, after I'm off the air, put them in the comment section on YouTube, or you can email me or post it to social media, retweet the announcement of the episode and quote it and ask your question, and by all means, let's have a discussion about this going forward. The chat room, I see Baka Umubo said, I didn't read this document in detail. Okay, but you were aware of the document, Baka? You were aware of the document? I mean, the document has a lot of information in it, truth be told. But I think the idea and some of the methods of how they go about their plan is pretty cool. I'll have to think about it personally more. For some of you who may have actually seen the plan and read it before, you may have, alternative ideas. And I would like to hear those ideas from you guys. Right? I am on WhatsApp, Baka. I am on WhatsApp. In fact, the Bitter Medicine podcast, we have a think tank on WhatsApp. We haven't been doing a whole lot in the group, but we are there. And if I find the link right now, what I'll do is I'll post it into the chat room. There is the link. For those of you who want to join the WhatsApp group for the Bitter Medicine podcast, and I also have the link for the Bitter Medicine podcast Discord, where we're gonna really start getting heavy into these reading and writing groups in the new year, according to the Romans. where we're gonna start putting together the framework of this curriculum. I mean, I have a framework pretty much, but I want you guys to also be there as well. So I'm posting the link in the Discord. Right now, so by all means, that link expires in 24 hours. So if you're gonna join, click the link now and join up. Okay, and Baka, if you want to discuss the ideas in the WhatsApp, that's fine by me. And don't wait for me to initiate conversation in the Discord. I think that happens a lot with the Discord. It's like, if I'm not saying too much, nothing much is said. By all means, have discussions. Post topics and we'll talk about it. Post topics related to curriculum, we'll really talk about it too. So those are two links. Join both. Join the WhatsApp group, join the Discord. The Discord is going to be doing a lot more work early in the new year. Okay? All right. Since there's no other participants, comments, or questions, I want to thank everyone who's on here, who's even silent. I want to thank you all for joining me tonight. Like I said, I didn't want to do a long episode tonight after doing like 3 hours and 2.5 hour episodes. I would like to keep them usually done by, hour and a half. Sometimes the reading is too good, you can't stop, and it's all good. I want to thank you guys for joining me. I want to remind you guys that this show is a part of a podcast network. It's small right now, but it's growing. Look for more growth in the near future. Make sure to check out other shows in the network. That's the Pro-Black Perspective, that's the Harsh Reality Podcast, that's the Queen's Council, and we have a few more coming up in the new year. All right? So until next time, which is actually tomorrow night at 8, I'll see you guys later. Peace.
Thanks for listening to the Bitter Medicine Podcast with your host, Koku. If you like what you just heard, we hope you pass along our web address, bittermedicineblogs.com, to your friends and colleagues, and share our show to all your social media. Be sure to check out our archive section on our website for previous podcasts. This has been a KWAZ radio production. Join us next time for another session of the Bitter Medicine Podcast. Follow us on Facebook at Bitter Medicine Show, Twitter, Bitter Meds, Tumblr, Bitter Meds, Instagram, Bitter Medicine.